One person's trash. The first thing Martin Vale found was a child's shoe. It was sitting on top of a pile of garbage behind an abandoned house on the edge of town. One red sneaker. Small. Maybe a size 3. The laces were still tied. Martin stood there with one hand on the steering wheel of his pickup, staring at it through the windshield. He should have kept driving. Instead, he smiled. Because Martin had learned something over the years. People threw away perfectly good things. Old furniture. Tools. Records. Jewelry. Books. Sometimes things worth thousands of dollars ended up sitting beside somebody's trash can simply because the person who owned them didn't know what they had. That was Martin's business. Trash picking. Some people called it scavenging. Martin preferred rescuing. He had a little saying he liked to repeat whenever someone questioned him. One person's trash is another person's treasure. He said it so often that his wife had eventually stopped answering. His wife had been dead for 11 years. Martin still talked to her anyway. Sometimes when he found something interesting, he'd say, "Look at this, Evelyn," as if she were standing beside him. That afternoon, he stepped out of his truck. The house had been empty for years. The windows were boarded. The front porch sagged toward the ground. A faded for sale sign hung sideways in the weeds. Martin noticed something strange immediately. There were no garbage cans. No dumpster. No bags. Just a massive pile of discarded belongings sitting behind the house. Furniture. Clothing. Boxes. Children's toys. Kitchen appliances. Photographs. Books. Dozens of objects. Almost as if someone had emptied the entire house into one enormous heap. Martin grinned. Jackpot. He climbed over the pile. The child's red sneaker caught his eye again. He picked it up. There was something inside. A small brass key. Martin turned it over in his palm. Stamped into the metal were 4 numbers. 3179. He slipped it into his pocket. Treasure, he whispered. Then something inside the house knocked. Martin froze. Knock. He looked toward the boarded windows. Nothing. He waited. Knock. 3 seconds later. Knock. Martin frowned. The sound wasn't coming from the house. It was coming from underneath the pile. He slowly backed away. The garbage shifted. A cardboard box slid down the mound. Something underneath it moved. Martin stared. Then laughed nervously. Raccoon. He climbed closer. The box was old and water-stained. Written across the side in black marker were the words, "Property of M. Vale." Martin stopped breathing. His own name. He reached for the box. Before he could touch it, something whispered from underneath. Martin. He dropped it. The whisper came again. Martin. He stumbled backward. The pile shifted. And somewhere beneath hundreds of pounds of discarded furniture, something began to laugh. Martin didn't sleep that night. The box sat on his kitchen table. He had brought it home. Of course he had. That was what Martin did. Fear had never stopped him from taking something interesting. He opened it at 2:13 in the morning. Inside were photographs. Hundreds of them. Martin picked up the first. It showed a family standing outside the abandoned house. A father. A mother. 2 children. Martin didn't recognize them. The second photograph showed the same family sitting around a dinner table. The third showed them standing beside a Christmas tree. The fourth showed the children sleeping. Then Martin reached the 5th photograph. He dropped it. It showed the same house, the same family, and Martin himself standing in the backyard. Except the photograph looked old. Very old. At least 20 years. Martin was younger in the picture. Maybe 30. He stared at his own face. Behind him stood the family. All 4 of them. But their faces had been scratched out. Martin turned the photograph over. Written on the back, "He will find US again." His hands began to shake. "No." He picked up another. It showed Martin walking toward the abandoned house. Another showed him climbing into his truck. Another showed him sleeping. Another showed him standing beside his wife's grave. Another showed him sitting at the kitchen table. The photographs weren't memories. They were predictions. Martin threw them across the room. Then he noticed one more photograph. It was sitting at the bottom of the box. Picture of Evelyn, his dead wife. She was standing in their old bedroom. She looked exactly as Martin remembered her. Except she wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking toward something behind it. Written underneath the photograph, "She was never buried." Martin stopped breathing. Then the telephone rang. He stared at it. The phone rang again. And again. Finally, Martin answered. "Hello." Silence. Then a woman's voice. His wife's voice. "Martin." His knees nearly gave out. "Evelyn." A long pause. Then, "You shouldn't have taken it." Martin looked at the box. "What?" "You always take things. Evelyn. You never ask where they came from." The line crackled. "Martin." Her voice became faint. "Put it back." "Put what back?" "The treasure." The line went dead. Martin stood in the kitchen. His eyes moved slowly toward the box. Something inside it moved. He stepped backward. The lid lifted by itself. Just an inch. Then two. Martin grabbed a kitchen knife. "Who's there?" The box opened. Inside was a child's red sneaker. The same one he'd found behind the house. Except now there were two. A matching pair. And beneath them, a wedding ring. Martin recognized it immediately. It had belonged to Evelyn. He had watched them lower her coffin 11 years earlier. He had watched the dirt cover it. He had held her hand at the funeral. He knew that ring. He reached toward it. A voice whispered from inside the box. "Found you." Martin screamed. The next morning, Martin drove back to the abandoned house. He carried the box. He intended to throw it back onto the pile. That was all. He parked beside the road. The house looked different. The boards covering the windows were gone. The front door was open. Martin stood outside. "Hello." No answer. He stepped inside. Dust covered everything. But beneath the dust were children's footprints. Small footprints. They led deeper into the house. Martin followed. The hallway ended at a staircase. The footprints went upstairs. He climbed. At the top was a bedroom. The walls were covered with photographs. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. Martin approached the nearest wall. Every photograph showed something that had been thrown away. A broken watch. A stuffed animal. A wedding ring. A photograph. A child's toy. A pair of shoes. A necklace. A wheelchair. A human tooth. Martin's stomach tightened. At the center of the wall was a single photograph. It showed him, standing in this exact room, holding the box. Martin slowly turned around. The room was empty. Then he heard breathing. Behind him. He turned. A little girl stood in the doorway. She was perhaps 8 years old. She wore a dirty white dress and one red sneaker. Martin couldn't move. "Who are you?" The girl looked at the box. "You found my things." "What?" "My things." She pointed toward the photographs. "My mother said people don't want us anymore." Martin swallowed. "Where's your mother?" The girl smiled. "She got thrown away too." Something moved downstairs. A heavy dragging sound. The girl stepped closer. "Do you know what happens to things people throw away?" Martin shook his head. The girl whispered, "They wait." Martin ran. He dropped the box. He sprinted down the stairs. Something chased him. Not footsteps. Dragging. Scratching. A wet, uneven scraping sound. He reached the front door. It slammed shut. He pulled. Nothing. Behind him. Scrape. 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 He turned. The hallway was full of people. Dozens of them. Men. Women. Children. All pale. All silent. All wearing clothes that looked decades old. And every single one of them was holding something. A broken toy. A photograph. Piece of jewelry. An old shoe. Kitchen knife. A watch. Things that had once belonged to them. Martin recognized the family from the photographs. They stood at the front. The father looked at him. "You took our house." Martin shook his head. "No." The mother stepped forward. "You took our children." "No." "You took our memories." "I don't know what you're talking about." The father smiled. "You always say that." Martin backed against the door. "What do you want?" The little girl answered. "Something new." Martin's blood turned cold. "What?" She pointed at him. "We've been waiting for someone to replace us." The lights went out. Police found Martin's truck 3 days later. It was abandoned outside the house. The house itself was demolished the following week. Nobody found Martin. But something strange happened afterward. People in town began finding objects on their doorsteps. A watch. A photograph. A child's shoe. A wedding ring. A broken toy. Nobody knew where they came from. And every object had the same 4 numbers scratched into it. 3179. People threw them away. But the next morning, they were back. Eventually, someone created a Facebook group for people who had received them. At first, there were 12 members. Then 40. Then hundreds. People began sharing photographs. Everyone had found something. Everyone had tried throwing it away. And every time, it returned. Then one woman noticed something. She uploaded a photograph of an old porcelain doll she'd found on her porch. Someone commented, "Look at the background." The woman zoomed in. Behind the doll was a house. The abandoned house. Another person uploaded a picture. Same house. Another. Same house. Another. Same house. Then somebody posted a photograph of a man's face. Martin Vale. The caption read, "Found this in my attic tonight." Nobody knew who the man was, until an older member recognized him. "That's Martin Vale." Someone replied, "Who?" The older member typed, "He used to collect garbage." Then another comment appeared, from an account that had been created only 6 minutes earlier. "He didn't collect garbage." Everyone stopped posting. A second comment appeared. "He collected people." Then a third. "One person's trash is another person's treasure." The account disappeared. The group was deleted. But not before one member downloaded the photographs. Years later, those photographs would become part of an investigation into dozens of unexplained disappearances. The strangest thing about the case was what investigators discovered when they searched Martin Vale's old house. Behind a false wall in the basement was a room. Inside were thousands of objects. Every object had a name attached to it. Every object belonged to a missing person. And at the center of the room sat a large wooden box. On the lid were 4 numbers. 3179. Investigators opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Martin standing beside a grave. His wife's grave. But Martin wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a little girl wearing one red sneaker. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten message. "We found a better home." Beneath that, another sentence had been written. In Martin's handwriting. I found something better too. And underneath it, a name. The name of the detective who would eventually find the photograph. The detective disappeared 11 days later. His wedding ring was found on a pile of garbage outside his house. Alongside it was a child's red sneaker. And taped to the sneaker was a note. "Thank you for throwing us away.